last video, we got enough copper to begin mining. Scavenging for nuggets here and there is all well and good for producing your first tools, but the anvil takes 900 units of metal, and a basic set of lamellar armor takes 2,700 units of metal. Suffice to say, you're going to need more than a few bits and pieces of copper scummed from a pond. You're going to need to find a true and honest mine. To do that, we have to learn how to prospect, which I've broken up into 3 parts. Part 1. The prospecting pick. The prospecting pick is the main tool you use to locate ore. It can be very confusing to new players, but the way it works is fairly straightforward. It has 2 modes, density search and node search, which you can switch between with F. To take a density search reading, break 1 stone block, move over a few blocks, and take another, and then repeat a 3rd time. The readout will show in the info log. Density search will give us a readout of 3 things. 1. It shows us all of the ores that have a chance of spawning in the chunk. 2. It shows us the chance that this has occurred during terrain generation. 3. It shows us how much of the chunk will be ore if it does spawn. The higher the number, the better, but don't get hung up on it too much. The real important information is the adjective here. If there is an ultra-high chance of an ore spawning, even if the amount that is likely to be there is pretty small, relatively speaking, that does not matter. What matters is that it is, in all likelihood, there. It's important to remember that density search does not actually detect real ore. It only gives you statistical facts about the area you're in. Still, it's extremely reliable if read correctly. The second mode is node search. Node search will actually tell you if, within a set radius around the block broken, an ore is present. It will also tell you how much ore there is within that radius. Because it does not detect the entire cluster of ore, you can use the amount displayed to determine if you're getting closer or further away from the ore. By default, when you make a world, this mode is disabled. You can find the setting here in the world generation settings. If you forgot to enable it and have already generated a world, it won't show up in the menu, and you will have to enter this command, which I will also put in the description of the video. When entering the command, enter an integer between 1 and 12 to define how far the radius of its search should extend. I personally use 5. Then restart your game. It's rarely worth it to take a surface reading with the node search mode when searching for ores, as you will likely only get nothing or maybe some spare flint lying just below the surface. Part 2. Chasing ore. Prospecting is not about wandering out at random and stumbling into a massive ore field. It's a logical process of finding trace readings of ore and following them to their highest concentration. If we imagined every chunk and its ore content as a heat map, it would look a lot less like this. Random chunks, some with no copper, some with a little, some with a lot, and more like this. A central hotspot of the highest ore concentration with steadily cooling tendrils branching out. Your goal as a prospector is to hit one of these weak little offshoots and chase it back to its source. Take a reading and make note of whether the ore you're looking for has a presence. If you get anything other than high or ultra-high, pick another direction and move about 80 blocks north, south, east, or west and take another sample. If the results stay the same or go up, you're on the right track, and you should continue moving in that direction, continuing to take readings. If the reading goes down, you need to return to your last reading, pick a new direction, and move 80 blocks that way. If you patiently follow this process, you can find the highest concentrations of ore without potentially wearing down your pick collecting a bunch of stone. Not every ore field is guaranteed to lead to a reading of ultra-high 99%. It's not impossible for certain ores to bottom out at decent or even as bad as minuscule, but with copper it is almost always possible to find an ultra-high. Let's take a recap of what happened here. We stumbled upon a reading of very poor copper, and heading east, we took another reading and found that it dropped down to minuscule copper. So we headed back west to our original reading and then continued on west, where the copper continued to rise but remained at very poor. So we headed even further west, but found that the copper got even worse. So we cycled back east to our highest reading of very poor copper, and decided to head south, where we were rewarded with a better reading of poor copper. So we continued to head south and found a reading of high copper. We headed even further south and found very high copper. But heading even further south than that, we found that the copper completely vanished. However, it's worth pointing out that we found a large concentration of tin, which will be very useful for the future. Seeking copper at the moment, though, we doubled back to our very high reading, continued a little bit further south than that, and then headed further west, finally landing on a reading of ultra-high copper. Part 3. Locating the mine. Let's take a look at what an ore node actually looks like. Ores in Vintage Story generate in large, flat, horizontal disks. They may have a slight tilt, but they're undeniably still far wider than they are tall. This means that vertical shafts punched down have a much better chance of hitting the disk than horizontal tunnels. In order to find an ore deposit with the most efficiency, we will deploy what I like to call the soda cracker method. The soda cracker method is a method of systematically searching a chunk for ore by making evenly spaced vertical shafts. Unfortunately for now, if you don't want to risk dropping into a mine full of drifters, you will have to make a spiral staircase, which is 3 times slower. Penetrate down to the mantle, and as you go, switch your prospecting pick to the node search mode and periodically take a sample. If your pick detects even trace amounts of ore, carve into the rock in any direction and see where the reading gets stronger or weaker, mimicking the same kind of systematic search we employed to find the chunk. The search radius of the propick is a sphere, so it is sometimes challenging to find the ore, as it could be somewhere diagonal to your current position. If you don't find anything, return to the surface and move over double the distance of your prospecting pick's range and repeat. If you don't know the range, or don't want to take occasional readings, just move 8 blocks, as that is a narrow enough gap between shafts that you're unlikely to miss a node. With this methodology, you are sure to either hit or come within detection range of ore. There are some additional miscellaneous pieces of advice I couldn't fit in smoothly, so here they are. Right now, you don't have a saw, but when you do, you can craft a bucket. The bucket allows you to make water columns to descend straight down. You can make the occasional air pockets to recover in as you descend, which also give you a good place to take a propick reading. On top of that, while torches are a good cheap option for lighting things up, they go out if held in water. Keep them out of your hotbar, and use an oil lamp for personal illumination, as it's immune to water. Be sure to pack a crock pot of food and as much inventory space as possible. Mining and prospecting can be lengthy, and you don't want to get caught out without food. As you spend time deeper and deeper underground, your temporal stability will reduce. If it drops low enough, you could risk forcing the spawn of some really nasty nightmare drifters. So be sure to leave before you get below 40% or so. Pack a stack of dirt with you. It's useful for blocking off caves you might stumble into by accident and can be used to get up or down certain pathways. Bring an extra pick. There is no way to craft a pick or break rock down in the mines. The last thing you want is to be trapped with no blocks and no means of getting back up out of the mine. Always keep a spare pick on hand. Copper tools are great, but you can only pour a small selection of items. With the introduction of the anvil and smithing, we can open a world of new possibilities for you. So the next video will be about smithing.